Sarah Martinez walked through the bustling food court at the mall, her worn combat boots making soft squeaks against the polished floor. The boots looked perfectly broken in, scuffed in all the right places, with the kind of wear that couldn't be faked. But, to the group of college students sitting at the corner table, they looked like another fashion statement. "Look at that girl trying so hard to look military," whispered Jessica, nudging her friend with her elbow. "Those boots are probably from some surplus store. She's never seen a day of combat in her life." Marcus, who was studying fashion merchandising, squinted at Sarah's outfit. "Definitely fake. Real military people don't dress like that when they're off duty. My cousin was in the army, and he says you can always tell the posers." The third member of their group, Tyler, pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is perfect for my TikTok. Another fake veteran trying to get attention and discounts." Sarah continued walking, completely unaware of the conversation happening behind her. She moved with a slight limp that favored her left leg, something the students didn't notice as they were too busy making jokes about her appearance. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a faded green jacket over a plain black shirt and jeans. She stopped at the sandwich shop where she worked part-time, greeting her manager with a quiet smile. Sarah had been working there for 3 months, always showing up early and staying late when needed. Her co-workers liked her because she was reliable and kind, though she rarely talked about her personal life. "Sarah, could you cover the evening shift today?" asked her manager, Linda. Jenny called in sick again. Of course, Sarah replied without hesitation. She needed the extra money, and working kept her mind occupied. The nightmares came less frequently when she was exhausted. As she tied her apron around her waist, Sarah caught sight of the college students still watching her from their table. She had dealt with suspicious looks before. People seemed to think they could spot a fake veteran from across a room, as if military service came with a uniform that never came off. The irony wasn't lost on her. These same people who questioned her service would probably be the first to thank her for it if they knew the truth. But Sarah had learned to keep her military background quiet. It attracted too many questions she wasn't ready to answer, too much attention she didn't want. The afternoon rush began, and Sarah focused on making sandwiches and taking orders. Her movements were efficient and precise, habits formed during years of military training that carried over into civilian life. She could assemble a sandwich in under 90 seconds, even during the busiest periods. A middle-aged man in a business suit approached the counter, his eyes immediately drawn to Sarah's boots. "Military?" he asked with genuine interest. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Yes, sir." "Which branch?" "My son just graduated from West Point." "Army," she replied, keeping her answer brief while she prepared his order. The man's face lit up. "That's wonderful. Thank you for your service. What was your MOS?" Sarah's hands paused for just a second as she reached for the lettuce. Military occupational specialty wasn't something civilians usually knew to ask about. "Combat medic," she said quietly. From across the food court, Tyler was still filming, catching snippets of the conversation. He couldn't hear everything, but he was convinced he was documenting someone pretending to be something they weren't. His TikTok followers loved these kinds of videos, especially when he could expose fake veterans. The businessman continued chatting while Sarah finished his sandwich. "Combat medic, that's tough work. Where were you stationed?" "Afghanistan, mostly," Sarah replied, handing him his order. 2 tours. "Wow, that's serious business. The medical corps saves so many lives over there." He paused, studying her face more carefully. "You seem young for 2 tours. Sarah managed a small smile. "I enlisted right out of high school. Wanted to make a difference." After the businessman left, Sarah noticed the college students were still there, still watching. She could see Tyler holding his phone up, pointing it in her direction. The familiar feeling of being under a microscope made her stomach tighten. The truth was, Sarah looked younger than her 26 years, and people often questioned whether she was old enough to have served in the military, let alone in combat. She had enlisted at 18, completed medic training, and deployed for her first tour when she was barely 19. By the time she was 23, she had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and was medically discharged due to injuries sustained in an IED explosion. But none of that was written on her face or displayed on her clothes. People saw what they expected to see, a young woman in combat boots who might be trying too hard to look tough or get attention. The afternoon wore on, and the students finally gathered their things to leave. Tyler made sure to get one last shot of Sarah behind the counter before heading out. He was already planning his video caption, "Fake veteran spotted at the mall." Stay tuned for the full expose. As they walked past the sandwich shop, Jessica made eye contact with Sarah and rolled her eyes dramatically, making sure Sarah saw her reaction. It was the kind of petty cruelty that people felt entitled to when they believed they were calling out a fraud. Sarah pretended not to notice, but the interaction left her feeling tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. She had faced enemy fire, treated wounded soldiers under attack, and watched friends die in her arms. But, somehow, the judgment of strangers in a mall food court could still cut deep. The evening shift was quieter, giving Sarah more time to think. She found herself touching the small medal that hung on a chain beneath her shirt, hidden under her clothes. It was a habit she had developed over the past year, a way to remind herself that her service was real, regardless of what others thought. Her phone buzzed with a text from her therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, reminding her about their appointment the next day. Sarah had been seeing her for PTSD treatment since returning home. The sessions helped, but progress was slow. Some days were better than others. Around 8 o'clock, a young woman approached the counter. She looked to be about college age, with short blonde hair and nervous energy. "Excuse me," she said quietly, "I was here earlier with some friends, and I wanted to apologize." Sarah looked up, confused. "Apologize for what?" "My friends were making comments about your boots, saying you were probably faking being military. I tried to tell them they were wrong, but they wouldn't listen." The woman shifted uncomfortably. "My dad's a veteran, and he taught me never to assume things about people's service." "You don't need to apologize," Sarah said gently. "But, thank you." "Are you really military?" the woman asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that's exactly what I said you shouldn't do. I'm being a hypocrite." Sarah smiled for the first time that day. "It's okay to ask respectfully." "Yes, I'm a veteran. Army medic." "I'm Amy," the woman said, extending her hand. "And I'm really sorry about my friends. Tyler was filming you for his social media, and that's not right." "Filming me?" Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Why?" Amy looked even more uncomfortable. "He makes videos about people he thinks are faking military service. He's got like 50,000 followers who eat that stuff up." Sarah's heart began racing, a familiar response that Dr. Rodriguez had helped her recognize as a panic trigger. The thought of being exposed online, of having thousands of strangers judge her service, made her feel sick. "I tried to stop him," Amy continued, "but he was convinced he was doing some kind of public service. He said fake veterans are a real problem and someone needs to call them out." "They are a real problem," Sarah agreed quietly. "But so is assuming everyone is fake." Amy nodded vigorously. "Exactly. My dad served 3 tours in Iraq, and he says the real veterans are usually the ones who don't talk about it much." Sarah's shift ended at 9, and she walked to her car with Amy's words echoing in her mind. Somewhere online, a video of her was probably being edited, with commentary about how she was probably lying about her service. The thought made her feel violated in a way she couldn't quite explain. She sat in her car for a few minutes before starting the engine, trying to use the breathing techniques Dr. Rodriguez had taught her. The parking lot was mostly empty, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that reminded her too much of the forward operating base where she had served. On the drive home to her small apartment, Sarah thought about the purple heart medal hanging around her neck. She had earned it during her second tour when an IED explosion killed 2 soldiers in her unit and left her with shrapnel wounds and a traumatic brain injury. The medal was real, her service was real, her injuries were real. But none of that would matter to the people who saw Tyler's video. Her apartment was sparse but clean, with very few personal decorations. Sarah had difficulty forming attachments to material things since returning home. The most prominent feature was a small shrine on her dresser with photos of the soldiers she couldn't save, including her best friend Maria, who had died in the same explosion that wounded Sarah. She made herself a simple dinner and sat down to eat in front of the television, but her mind kept wandering back to the events of the day. The college student's assumptions, Tyler's camera, and Amy's apology all swirled together in her thoughts. Before bed, Sarah opened her laptop and searched for Tyler's TikTok account. It didn't take long to find him. His bio proudly proclaimed him to be an exposer of fakes and frauds. His recent videos showed him confronting people he suspected of lying about various things, from military service to medical conditions. She scrolled through the comments on his videos, and her heart sank. His followers were vicious, doxing people they suspected of lying and sending them threats. Several of the people in his videos had been harassed online for weeks after being featured. Sarah closed the laptop and got ready for bed, knowing sleep would be difficult. The combination of being filmed without her knowledge and the possibility of online harassment was triggering memories she worked hard to suppress. As she lay in bed, Sarah found herself thinking about the path that had led her to that food court. She had joined the army to serve her country and help people, inspired by her grandfather's stories of being a medic in Vietnam. She never imagined she would end up defending her right to exist as a veteran to strangers in a mall. The boots that had triggered so much judgment were the same boots she had worn during her deployments. They were comfortable and familiar, like old friends. She kept them because they reminded her of who she had been before the explosion changed everything. Tomorrow she would have to go to work and face the possibility that Tyler's video had gone viral overnight. She would have to pretend everything was normal while dealing with the anxiety of being exposed to online judgment. But tonight, she held her Purple Heart and remembered the words her drill sergeant had said during basic training: a real soldier's worth isn't determined by what others think, but by what they've done when no one was watching. Sarah fell asleep clutching the metal, unaware that across town, Tyler was staying up late editing his video, convinced he was about to expose another fake veteran and gain thousands of new followers in the process. Sarah woke up at 4:30 a.m. from another nightmare, her sheets soaked in sweat and her heart pounding. The dream was always the same: the sound of the explosion, the screams of her fellow soldiers, and the feeling of helplessness as she tried to save Maria while bleeding from her own wounds. She had learned not to fight the early mornings, instead using the time to exercise and prepare for the day. After a quick shower, she checked her phone and her stomach dropped. Amy had sent her a message late last night with a link to Tyler's TikTok video. The post had already gained 15,000 views and hundreds of comments. The caption read, "Fake veteran alert." This girl at the mall was pretending to be military for attention. Real veterans don't dress like this. Shared to expose the fraud. Sarah scrolled through the comments with growing horror. People were making assumptions about her appearance, her age, and her motivations. Some had even started trying to identify her, posting screenshots from the video alongside crude commentary about her looks and supposed lies. Typical attention seeker: real military women don't look like that. She's probably never left her hometown. Someone should report her for stolen valor. These fake veterans make me sick. Mixed in with the negative comments were a few defending her, mostly from people with military profile pictures or family members in service. But they were vastly outnumbered by the accusations and insults. Sarah's hands were shaking as she put down the phone. Dr. Rodriguez had warned her about social media and its potential to trigger PTSD episodes. The feeling of being hunted and judged by strangers was too similar to the hypervigilance she had experienced in combat zones. She made coffee and sat at her small kitchen table, trying to decide what to do. Her first instinct was to hide, to call in sick to work and avoid the public until the video was forgotten. But that felt too much like giving up, and she had fought too hard to build her new life to let strangers destroy it. By 7 a.m., her phone was buzzing with notifications. Someone had figured out where she worked and posted the information in the comments. The sandwich shop's Yelp page was being flooded with fake reviews calling them out for employing a stolen valor case. Sarah called Linda, her manager, to give her a heads up about the situation. Linda had always been supportive, but Sarah wasn't sure how she would react to the negative attention. "Sarah, honey, are you okay?" Linda's voice was filled with concern. "I saw some weird reviews this morning, but I didn't understand what they were talking about." "I'm fine," Sarah lied. "Someone made a video about me claiming I'm faking military service. It's not true, but people online believe anything." "That's ridiculous," Linda said firmly. "I've worked with you for months. You're one of the most honest people I know. Don't let these keyboard warriors get to you." "I understand if you need me to stay home until this blows over," Sarah offered reluctantly. "Absolutely not. You come to work as scheduled. If anyone gives you trouble, they'll deal with me." Sarah felt a wave of gratitude toward Linda. Having support from someone who knew her personally made the online attacks feel slightly less overwhelming. She arrived at work an hour early, hoping to avoid the morning rush and any potential confrontations. But, as she walked through the mall, she noticed people looking at her differently. Some were clearly recognizing her from the video, pulling out their phones to record or whispering to their companions. The morning started quietly, but, around 10 a.m., a man in his 50s approached the counter with his phone in hand. "Are you the girl from that video? The one pretending to be military?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm a veteran, and I'd be happy to make you a sandwich." "Sure you are," the man scoffed. "My son served in Afghanistan. Real soldiers don't parade around in combat boots for attention." Before Sarah could respond, Linda appeared from the back office. "Sir, either order something or move along. My employees are here to work, not be harassed." The man looked surprised by Linda's firm tone. "I'm just trying to expose stolen valor. It's disrespectful to real veterans." "My employee is a real veteran," Linda said calmly. "And, even if she wasn't, harassing minimum wage workers isn't heroic." The man muttered something under his breath and walked away, but Sarah could see him posting on his phone as he left. She knew her interaction would probably end up online within minutes. Throughout the morning, several more people recognized her from the video. Most just stared or whispered, but a few made pointed comments about fake veterans and stolen valor. Each interaction chipped away at Sarah's emotional reserves. Around noon, Amy appeared at the counter, looking upset. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I reported Tyler's video, but TikTok said it doesn't violate their community guidelines." "It's not your fault," Sarah said, though she appreciated Amy's continued support. "My dad saw the video," Amy continued. "He's furious. He said Tyler is exactly the kind of person who makes life harder for real veterans by creating this atmosphere of suspicion." Amy's father, it turned out, was David Chen, a well-respected veteran advocate who ran a non-profit supporting returning soldiers. He had 30 years of military experience and had testified before Congress about veteran issues. "He wants to meet you," Amy said. "Not to verify your service or anything invasive, but because he thinks you might benefit from connecting with other veterans who've dealt with similar situations." Sarah was hesitant about meeting new people, especially those connected to military service. Her experiences with veteran groups had been mixed. Some were incredibly supportive, while others made her feel like she had to prove her worthiness constantly. "I understand if you're not ready," Amy said gently. "But he specifically said you don't have to talk about your service or prove anything. He just knows how isolating it can feel when people question your experience." The lunch rush arrived, bringing with it a mix of regular customers and video seekers. Sarah noticed that her usual customers were being extra kind, perhaps sensing her stress or having heard about the online harassment. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who came in 3 times a week for the same turkey sandwich, squeezed Sarah's hand when she handed over the order. "I don't know what's going on, dear, but you're a good girl. Don't let anyone tell you different." The simple kindness nearly brought Sarah to tears. She had forgotten how powerful genuine human connection could be in the face of online cruelty. Around 2 p.m., Tyler himself showed up with 2 friends and a camera. Sarah's heart rate spiked when she recognized him, and she had to grip the counter to steady herself. "Excuse me," Tyler said loudly,
making sure his camera could catch the interaction. "I'm the one who made the video about you. Would you like to respond to the allegations that you're lying about your military service?" Linda appeared instantly, having spotted the camera from across the food court. "Get out," she said firmly. "Now." "This is a public space," Tyler protested. "I have the right to film." "And I have the right to refuse service to anyone," Linda shot back. "Security." A mall security guard approached, and Tyler reluctantly lowered his camera. But Sarah could see he was still recording audio, probably hoping to catch her admitting she was lying or becoming defensive. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic," Sarah said clearly, looking directly at Tyler's camera. "I was wounded in action and medically discharged. I've never claimed to be anything I'm not." Tyler looked surprised by her calm response. He had clearly expected her to either run away or become angry, giving him better content for his followers. "Can you prove that?" he challenged. Sarah felt the familiar weight of the Purple Heart beneath her shirt, but she wasn't about to display her medal for Tyler's entertainment. "I don't owe you proof of anything." The security guard stepped closer. "Sir, the manager has asked you to leave. Please comply or I'll have to escort you out." Tyler and his friends left, but Sarah knew the footage would be online within hours. She had managed to stay calm during the confrontation, but her hands were shaking so badly she had to step into the back room to collect herself. Linda followed her. "Honey, why don't you take the rest of the day off? This is getting out of hand." Sarah wanted to agree, but leaving felt like admitting defeat. "I'll be okay. I just need a minute." But the minutes stretched into 10, then 15. Sarah found herself having difficulty breathing, a familiar symptom of her PTSD that usually appeared during high-stress situations. She tried the grounding techniques Dr. Rodriguez had taught her, focusing on 5 things she could see, 4 she could touch, 3 she could hear, 2 she could smell, and 1 she could taste. When she finally returned to the counter, she found Amy waiting with an older man who could only be her father. David Chen was in his 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. "Ms. Martinez," he said softly. "I'm David Chen. My daughter told me what's been happening." Sarah nodded, still feeling shaky from her panic attack. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Chen. I won't keep you long, but I wanted you to know that this situation isn't uncommon. I've worked with dozens of veterans who've been targeted by these online vigilantes. Most of them are well-meaning but misguided." "It doesn't feel well-meaning," Sarah said quietly. "I know. And you're right to feel that way. Being questioned about your service is traumatic, especially when you've already sacrificed so much." David's voice carried the weight of personal experience. "I wanted to give you this." He handed her a business card for his nonprofit. "We have a support group that meets twice a week. It's specifically for veterans dealing with online harassment and stolen valor accusations. You're not alone in this." Sarah took the card, surprised by how relieved she felt to know others had gone through similar experiences. "Thank you." "Also," David continued, "I've been in contact with some veteran advocates who specialize in combating false stolen valor claims. If you're interested, we can help you gather documentation to definitively shut down these accusations." The idea of proving her service to strangers online still felt wrong to Sarah, but she was beginning to understand that sometimes fighting back was necessary for peace of mind. After David and Amy left, Sarah finished her shift in relative peace. The video of Tyler's confrontation had indeed been posted, but this time the comments were more mixed. Seeing her calm, dignified response had changed some people's minds about her authenticity. That evening, Sarah drove to the address on David Chen's business card. The building was modest, housing several veteran service organizations in adjoining offices. The support group was meeting in a small conference room with a circle of folding chairs. When she walked in, she was surprised to find 8 other people of various ages and backgrounds. David introduced her simply as Sarah, without mentioning the recent video or her specific situation. "We have a simple rule here," David explained. "Nobody has to prove anything to anyone.
We all know that military service comes in many forms, and trauma affects people differently.
This is a judgment-free zone.
As the group members shared their stories, Sarah realized she wasn't alone in feeling judged and misunderstood. There was Marcus, a Navy veteran who was questioned because he looked too young. Jennifer, an Army veteran who was harassed because she didn't fit stereotypes about female soldiers. Robert, a Marine who was targeted online after someone filmed him having a PTSD episode in public. Each story resonated with Sarah's experience, and, for the first time since Tyler's video went viral, she felt like she could breathe freely. These people understood the unique pain of having your service questioned by strangers who had never worn a uniform. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah found herself opening up about her deployment, her injuries, and the guilt she carried about surviving when Maria didn't. The group listened without judgment, offering support without trying to fix anything. The hardest part, Sarah said, is feeling like I have to prove I deserve respect. I never asked for special treatment because of my service, but I also never expected to be called a liar for wearing boots.
An older veteran named Frank nodded knowingly. The internet has made everyone think they're an expert on military service.
They see too many movies and think they know what a real soldier looks like. As the meeting ended, David approached Sarah with a folder.
These are template documents for requesting service records and medical documentation.
If you decide you want to publicly verify your service, these will help.
But, remember, you don't owe anyone proof of your sacrifice.
Sarah drove home feeling lighter than she had in days. The support group had reminded her that her worth wasn't determined by the opinions of internet strangers, but by her own actions and the bonds she had formed with fellow veterans. When she checked her phone before bed, she found that several members of the support group had connected with her on social media, offering continued support. Amy had also sent her an update. Her father had reached out to other veteran advocates, and they were planning a coordinated response to combat the harassment. For the first time since the video went viral, Sarah felt hope that the situation might improve. She still wore her purple heart beneath her clothes, but now it felt less like a shield and more like a reminder that she belonged to a community of people who understood sacrifice and service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Sarah fell asleep knowing she wasn't facing them alone. Sarah returned to work the next morning determined not to let the online harassment control her life. The overnight shift in public opinion had been encouraging, but she knew the internet's attention span was unpredictable. Today could bring new challenges or the blessed anonymity of yesterday's news. Linda greeted her with coffee and a supportive smile. "How are you holding up, honey?" "Better," Sarah said, and meant it. The support group had given her perspective and tools for dealing with the situation.
"I met with some other veterans last night. It helped to know I'm not the first person to go through this."
"Good. And I want you to know, corporate called this morning about those fake reviews. I told them exactly what I think of people who harass employees based on internet videos. They're backing us completely." The morning started quietly, but around 10 a.m., Sarah noticed a woman in her 70s watching her from across the food court. Unlike the hostile stare she had grown accustomed to, this woman's gaze seemed thoughtful and sad. Eventually, she approached the counter with measured steps. "Excuse me, dear," the woman said softly.
"Are you the young lady from that video?"
Sarah braced herself for another confrontation.
"Yes, ma'am."
"I wanted to apologize," the woman continued, surprising Sarah completely. "My grandson showed me that video yesterday, and I'm ashamed to say I believed it at first. But then, I saw how you handled that young man with the camera, and I realized I was wrong." The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Eleanor Hoffman, and she pulled out a faded photograph from her purse. "This is my late husband, Richard. He served in Korea and Vietnam. He came home different, wounded in ways people couldn't see. He spent years dealing with people who didn't understand his service." Sarah looked at the black and white photo of a young soldier in dress uniform. "He looks like he was a good man." He was. "And he taught me that real heroes don't always look like what we expect. They're often quiet, humble people carrying invisible burdens." Mrs. Hoffman's eyes were wet with tears. I see that same look in your eyes, dear.
The look of someone who's seen too much.
The unexpected kindness from a stranger hit Sarah harder than all the online insults combined.
Thank you for telling me that.
Richard always said the worst enemy of veterans wasn't the enemy overseas, but the people at home who questioned their service.
He'd be disgusted by what's happening to you.
Mrs. Hoffman ordered a simple sandwich and sat nearby for the next hour, occasionally making encouraging eye contact with Sarah when other customers seemed to recognize her. Her presence felt like having a protective grandmother nearby. Around noon, Amy arrived with her father and another man Sarah didn't recognize. The stranger was tall and distinguished-looking, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to being taken seriously.
"Sarah, I'd like you to meet Colonel James Wilson," David said.
"He's retired Army, and he's offered to help with your situation."
Colonel Wilson extended his hand with a firm shake. "Ms. Martinez, I've been following what happened to you, and it's unacceptable. I've spent the last 24 hours making some calls."
"Sir?"
Sarah wasn't sure what kind of help he meant.
"I've contacted the media relations departments at several major veteran organizations. We're planning a coordinated response to combat these false stolen valor accusations. Not just for you, but for all the veterans being targeted by these internet vigilantes." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the idea of more public attention. "I appreciate the offer, Colonel, but I'm not sure I want more media coverage."
"I understand your hesitation," Colonel Wilson said kindly.
"But sometimes the only way to stop a lie from spreading is to counter it with the truth.
We're not talking about exploiting your service for publicity. We're talking about educating people about the real harm these accusations cause."
David added, "We've also been in contact with several social media platforms about their policies regarding stolen valor content.
Most of them have no clear guidelines for handling false accusations."
The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance to the food court. Tyler had returned, but this time he wasn't alone. He was with a local news crew, apparently having convinced them to do a story about stolen valor in the community. Sarah watched in horror as the reporter interviewed Tyler, who was gesturing dramatically and pointing toward the sandwich shop. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but his animated body language suggested he was embellishing his story for maximum impact. "That's it," Colonel Wilson said firmly.
"This has gone far enough."
He walked directly toward the news crew with the confident stride of someone who had commanded troops in combat. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation from across the food court, but she could see Tyler's expression change from confident to uncertain as the colonel spoke.
After a few minutes, the colonel returned with a business card. "Channel 7 wants to interview you, Sarah."
Their original story was going to be about stolen valor, but now they're more interested in the story of veterans being falsely accused.
"I don't want to be on television," Sarah said immediately.
"You don't have to be," David assured her. "But they're willing to do a story about the broader issue of false accusations without showing your face or using your name. It might help other veterans in similar situations."
Sarah considered the offer while watching Tyler argue with the news crew.
The reporter seemed to be asking him pointed questions he couldn't answer confidently. Mrs. Hoffman, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, spoke up. "Dear, my Richard never wanted attention for his service either. But sometimes speaking up helps other people who are suffering in silence." The weight of that observation settled on Sarah's shoulders. She thought about the other members of David's support group, all dealing with similar harassment and judgment. Maybe her experience could help change how people thought about these accusations. "I'll do it," she said finally. "But I want to talk about more than just my situation. I want people to understand how much damage these false accusations do to real veterans." Colonel Wilson smiled approvingly.
"That's exactly the right approach.
We'll make sure you're prepared for any questions, and we'll have the proper documentation to back up everything you say." While Colonel Wilson coordinated with the news crew, Sarah called Dr. Rodriguez to discuss how the media attention might affect her PTSD. Her therapist was supportive but cautious, helping Sarah identify potential triggers and coping strategies. "The most important thing," Dr. Rodriguez said, "is that you're doing this for the right reasons and you feel in control of the process. Don't let anyone pressure you into sharing more than you're comfortable with.
The interview was scheduled for the following morning at David's nonprofit office.
Sarah spent the rest of her shift feeling nervous but determined. She had spent months letting other people define her narrative, now she had a chance to speak for herself. That evening, she attended another support group meeting, this time specifically to prepare for the interview. The other veterans offered advice about dealing with media attention and staying focused on the important message. Marcus, the Navy veteran who looked young for his age, shared his experience with a radio interview he had done.
The key is remembering that you're not just speaking for yourself.
You're speaking for everyone who's been in this situation. Jennifer, the Army veteran who had faced gender-based harassment, added, "Don't let them make it about proving your individual service.
Make it about the broader problem of assuming people are lying." Frank, the older Marine, offered perhaps the most important advice: remember that the people watching aren't your enemies.
Most of them have good intentions but bad information. Your job is to educate, not attack. Sarah spent the evening preparing her thoughts and gathering the documents Colonel Wilson had requested. Her DD-214 discharge papers, medical records, and unit information were all neatly organized in a folder. For the first time, she also decided to bring her Purple Heart medal, not to show off, but to have it near her for strength. She called her sister Maria, whom she had named after her fallen friend, to let her know about the upcoming interview. Maria lived across the country but had been following the situation online. "I'm proud of you for speaking up," Maria said.
"Mom and Dad would be proud too.
You served your country, and now you're serving your fellow veterans by telling the truth." The mention of their parents, who had died in a car accident while Sarah was deployed, brought tears to her eyes. They had been so proud when she enlisted, and she often wondered what they would think of the woman she had become. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not the same person who enlisted," Sarah confessed to her sister.
"You're not," Maria replied gently. "You're stronger, wiser, and more compassionate."
The Sarah who enlisted wanted to help people, and that's exactly what you're doing now.
That night, Sarah laid out her clothes for the interview: simple black slacks, a white blouse, and her combat boots.
She had considered wearing different shoes to avoid any visual distractions, but David had encouraged her to be authentic. "Those boots are part of your story," he had said.
"Don't let anyone make you ashamed of them."
As she prepared for bed, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few days. The online harassment had been traumatic, but it had also led her to a community of support she hadn't known existed. She was no longer facing the judgment alone. She woke up early the next morning, feeling nervous but ready. The interview would be challenging, but she had something many of her accusers lacked: the truth, supported by documentation, witnessed by fellow veterans, and backed by the strength she had found in her community. Before leaving for the interview, Sarah put on the chain with her Purple Heart, letting the medal rest visibly outside her blouse for the first time in months. She wasn't wearing it for show or sympathy, but as a reminder of who she was and what she had endured. The drive to David's office gave her time to practice her talking points and use the breathing techniques Dr. Rodriguez had taught her. When she arrived, she found Colonel Wilson, David, and Amy waiting with encouraging smiles. "Remember," Colonel Wilson said as they walked into the building, "you're not on trial. You're a veteran sharing your experience to help others.
That's an honorable mission."
As they entered the conference room where the interview would take place, Sarah touched her medal one last time and thought about Maria, her fallen friend who would never have the chance to tell her own story. Today, Sarah would speak not just for herself, but for all the veterans whose service had been questioned, dismissed, or forgotten. The news crew was already setting up their equipment, and Sarah could see Tyler lurking outside the building with his phone, probably hoping to film her arrival. But she was no longer intimidated by his presence. She had found her voice, her community, and her strength.
Now it was time to use them.
The interview began at 10 a.m. in David's conference room, with natural light streaming through large windows and Veteran Service Awards displayed respectfully on the walls.
Reporter Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 had a warm, professional demeanor that immediately put Sarah at ease. We're here with Sarah Martinez, an Army veteran who recently became the target of online harassment after being accused of faking her military service. Jennifer began. Sarah, thank you for agreeing to share your story.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to set the record straight, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her nervousness. The interview covered Sarah's deployment history, her medical discharge, and the recent social media attacks. Jennifer's questions were respectful and well-informed, clearly having done her homework on veteran issues.
Can you tell us about your service without getting into anything too personal? Jennifer asked.
I enlisted in the Army at 18 and served as a combat medic for almost 5 years. I completed 2 tours in Afghanistan, working primarily with forward operating bases to provide medical support for combat operations. Sarah's voice carried quiet pride.
On my second deployment, our convoy hit an IED.
2 soldiers in my unit were killed, and several of us were wounded. Sarah touched the purple heart medal visible on her chest. I was awarded this for injuries sustained in that attack.
I was medically discharged due to traumatic brain injury and PTSD.
Jennifer nodded respectfully.
What was your reaction when you first saw the video accusing you of faking your service? Honestly?
I felt violated. Military service is deeply personal, and having strangers judge you based on how you look or dress is painful. But what hurt more was knowing that other veterans go through this regularly. Colonel Wilson, who was seated nearby as a military expert for the segment, added his perspective.
What happened to Sarah represents a broader problem.
Well-meaning people trying to protect the honor of military service are inadvertently attacking the very veterans they claim to support. The interview continued for 30 minutes, covering the psychological impact of stolen valor accusations, the challenges veterans face reintegrating into civilian life, and the importance of treating service members with respect rather than suspicion. What would you say to people who see this story and think they can spot fake veterans?
Jennifer asked.
Sarah paused thoughtfully.
I'd say that military service doesn't have a uniform appearance.
Veterans are young and old, male and female, from every background imaginable. We don't all look like action movie heroes, and many of us prefer to blend in rather than stand out.
And, to those who made accusations against you specifically?
I hope they understand that their intentions might have been good, but their actions caused real harm. I also hope they'll think twice before making assumptions about other veterans in the future. After the formal interview, Jennifer conducted additional segments with Colonel Wilson about veteran advocacy and David about his non-profit's work supporting veterans facing online harassment. The story aired that evening during the 6 p.m. newscast, with a follow-up segment planned for the next morning.
Sarah watched from her apartment with a mixture of anxiety and relief.
Seeing herself on television was surreal, but she was proud of how she had represented herself and other veterans. The response was immediate and largely positive. Sarah's work phone began ringing with calls from supporters, including several local veterans who wanted to share their own experiences with false accusations. Linda fielded dozens of calls at the sandwich shop, mostly from people expressing support for Sarah.
Tyler's TikTok account faced a wave of criticism after the news story aired.
Many of his followers began questioning his other videos, and several people he had previously targeted came forward with their own documentation proving their service. Within 48 hours, Tyler deleted the original video about Sarah and posted a brief apology. But the most meaningful response came from unexpected sources. Mrs. Hoffman appeared at the sandwich shop the next morning with a group of elderly women from her church, all of whom had family members who served in the military. We wanted to show our support, Mrs. Hoffman explained. And we've been talking to our friends and family about not making assumptions about veterans. Throughout the week, Sarah received messages from veterans across the country who had seen the news story. Some shared their own experiences with false accusations, while others thanked her for speaking out about an issue they had faced silently. David's nonprofit saw a significant increase in calls from veterans seeking support, and several other organizations reached out about partnering on education efforts about stolen valor harassment.
Colonel Wilson kept Sarah updated on the broader advocacy efforts her story had sparked. 3 major social media platforms are reviewing their policies on stolen valor content, he reported.
and were working with veteran organizations to develop educational materials for the public. Perhaps most importantly, the support group at David's office grew from 8 members to over 20 in the weeks following Sarah's interview. Veterans who had been suffering alone discovered they weren't the only ones facing these challenges. Amy became a regular volunteer at the nonprofit, helping to coordinate support for veterans dealing with online harassment. "Your courage to speak up inspired me to do more than just apologize for other people's bad behavior," she told Sarah. Dr. Rodriguez noted significant improvement in Sarah's PTSD symptoms during their sessions. "Taking control of your narrative and finding community support has clearly been therapeutic," she observed. "You've moved from feeling like a victim to becoming an advocate." The changes in Sarah's daily life were subtle but meaningful. She walked with more confidence, no longer scanning crowds for hostile faces or hidden cameras. The constant anxiety about being recognized had largely faded as the positive response to her story overshadowed the initial harassment. Her relationship with her military service also evolved. 4 months after her discharge, Sarah had hidden her veteran status to avoid questions and attention. Now she found herself more comfortable acknowledging her background when relevant. 1 month after the news story aired, Sarah was approached by a high school counselor who had seen the interview. The school was developing a program to teach students about veteran issues and wanted Sarah to speak to students about her experience. "I'm not really a public speaker," Sarah initially protested. "You don't need to be," the counselor assured her. "You just need to be honest about your experience. These kids need to understand the impact of their online behavior." Sarah agreed to speak to a small group of students, which led to more speaking opportunities. She discovered she enjoyed education work and was effective at helping young people understand the real-world consequences of social media behavior. 6 months later, Sarah had transitioned from her part-time job at the sandwich shop to working full-time with David's nonprofit. Her role involved supporting veterans facing online harassment and developing educational programs about respectful veteran advocacy. The combat boots that had started the whole controversy became something of a symbol for the organization. Sarah still wore them regularly, no longer as a statement of defiance but simply because they were comfortable and familiar. Tyler, meanwhile, had largely disappeared from social media after his apology. According to Amy, he had transferred schools and was reportedly volunteering with a local veteran organization as part of his effort to make amends for his previous behavior. The support group at David's office had become a central part of Sarah's life. She now co-facilitated meetings, helping newer members navigate the challenges of online harassment and false accusations. The irony, she often told new group members, is that questioning veteran service actually dishonors the very thing these people claim to protect. Real support means trusting veterans to tell their own stories. 1 year after the original TikTok video, Sarah received an unexpected message through the nonprofit's website. It was from Jessica, one of Tyler's friends who had made comments about her boots that first day in the food court. "I know you probably don't remember me," Jessica wrote, "but I was one of the people making jokes about your boots at the mall. I saw your interview and realized how wrong I was. I'm studying social work now, partly because your story made me want to help people instead of judging them. I hope you can forgive my ignorance." Sarah replied with grace and appreciation, inviting Jessica to volunteer with the nonprofit if she was genuinely interested in veteran advocacy. The purple heart that Sarah wore beneath her clothes during those dark days now hung proudly in her office, not as a shield against accusation but as a reminder of the strength that came from facing challenges with dignity and community support. On quiet evenings, Sarah often thought about her friend Maria, who had died in the explosion that changed both their lives. She believed Maria would be proud of how the trauma had ultimately led to healing and service for others. Sarah's combat boots, now thoroughly worn from daily use in her advocacy work, had become exactly what they appeared to be on that first day in the mall, the footwear of a real veteran who had served her country with honor and continued to serve her fellow veterans with courage. The story that began with judgment and assumptions had transformed into one of understanding and community. Sarah had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to false accusations wasn't documentation or proof, but the simple act of standing up and telling the truth. In her final reflection, Sarah realized that the boots had never been fake to anyone who mattered. They had always been real, worn by a real veteran with real experiences and real wounds, both visible and invisible. The only thing that had changed was her willingness to stand behind that truth and help others do the same. The sandwich shop still displayed a small sign thanking veterans for their service, and Linda often told the story of her employee who taught their community about the difference between supporting veterans and judging them. Mrs. Hoffman continued to visit regularly, always ready to defend any veteran who faced questioning from other customers. Sarah's story became part of the training materials for veteran advocacy organizations across the country, helping to educate well-meaning supporters about the harm that false accusations could cause. But, more importantly, it became a source of hope for veterans facing similar challenges, proving that truth and community could triumph over online harassment and misplaced suspicion. The boots remained the same, but everything else had changed for the better.